Hi, you're watching this video because you are new to Jewish Studies hybrid class. You probably transferred into this class and you're making up some of the videos. I want to make sure that this is video number 2, so you probably want to watch video number 1 first, answer those questions, email them to me, and then this is video number 2. Same deal, answer the questions that I ask, email them to me at slight@tarbut.com. So here we go. Second day of class, I went over the percentages of what make up this class. And one of the things that was really important was that if you see participation is 25% of your grade, usually that happens by I sit down after class and I basically kind of ask myself who talked. If you talk, you get a 4 out of 4. If you don't talk, you get less than that. However, if you get less than that, the second step is I look at your red notebooks. And if in your red notebooks I see some notes, I see some questions you're asking there, because some people just don't like to actually talk in class. And I want to make sure that I want to acknowledge the effort that you're placing, if not putting it out there for everyone, at least you're thinking about some of the issues and writing it down. So that's another way to get your points. Just trying to be as fair as possible in that regard. All right. Let's move on. So one other thing that each and every week we are participating in an activity that every Jewish studies class from grades 5 to grade 12 participate in, which is they look at a specific Torah story, one pasuk or two pasukim per week, one sentence or two sentences per week, and it should take us through the entire year. And the story we're looking at this year is Moshe at the burning bush, right before when he's given the mission by God to go to the Israelite to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Can't wait to be part of that. We'll start that next week. So we ended class last week and asking the question, in this passage, which is actually the part of the Mishnah, actually an introduction to a part of the Mishnah called Pirkei Avot, which I actually think of more as Jewish fortune cookies, a lot of nice sayings for how to live. But this is the introduction to that. Moshe received the Torah at Mount Sinai. Moshe transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua transmitted it to elders. The elders transmitted the prophets to the men of the Great Assembly, and the Great Assembly said this. And we were kind of asking the question: what when they say when Moshe says when it says Moshe received the Torah, what are we talking about here? I made the claim in class that we're talking about something called the oral law. This law, all the laws that weren't explained in the Torah, that were actually just kind of spoken between God and received by Moshe. And there was a little bit of a disagreement actually in class of is that true? Maybe this word Torah was actually only talking about that Torah and not this. So I did a little bit of research. And the first place I looked was I asked my friend who has a PhD in Talmud, and here's what he says. He says, "Hi, Stu. That's my name. Great to hear from you. Question number 1. I think this Mishnah, meaning this one, is defending the authenticity of the oral Torah. This is how it is generally read. In the rabbinic mind, when the written Torah would not have needed any special Mesirah or reason to be transmitted. It would have just been a document. You would have given it over to someone. It wouldn't be transmitted. And it would have been available to all without the need of an intermediary, meaning you won't need these people to say, oh, here's this, oh, here's that. The authenticity of the oral Torah, that's this stuff that God spoke to Moses, on the other hand, was very much under attack in the rabbinic period. Right, so we'll talk about more of that. Also, at Sinai, it's not just Moshe who received the Torah, it's all of Israel. So this is question number 1. According to Dr. Kolb, what are the reasons why he believes that when it says Moshe received the Torah at Mount Sinai, we're actually talking about this stuff that Moshe received and transmitted? What are the 3 things that what are the 3 reasons Dr. Kolb gives? So write that down in your answer, in your email that you're sending to me. All right. Um, Next is actually, I did some research as well, and I happened to come upon this idea that actually the idea of what this means, the idea that this might mean oral Torah or Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is in Hebrew oral Torah, comes from actually a verse in the Torah itself, which says the following. And these are the laws and the rules and the Torahs that God gave through the hands of Moshe to the Israelites. So my question number 4 is, question number 2, which has only one part. The first question had 3 parts. Is what in this verse kind of hints at the fact that there might not just be only the written Torah, but might actually also be another kind of thing that we're calling Torah as well. That's question number 2, and there's a hint actually in this verse. It's actually pretty obvious. Okay. And by the way, Rashi gives us, if you didn't get it, Rashi kind of gives us the explanation. So read over what Rashi says. And for question number 3, summarize what Rashi believes is the hint in this pasuk, in this verse right here. Right. So, so our answer is actually, it's not or, rather our answer number 4, question number 4 is what is Rashi saying? That when it says Torah here, it's not talking about this or this. It's not talking about the written Torah or the oral Torah. It's talking about, that's question number 4, both. Okay. So we mentioned in class again that there's a big difference between this Torah that we know was given by God and this other thing that now all of a sudden we're calling Torah. And we came up with a couple reasons why that is. List for me 2 reasons. Question number 5, A and B. 2 reasons why people might have a problem with calling this thing right here Torah. Okay. And here are 2 answers that are 2 traditional answers for how they could call this Torah. Saadia Gaon says something, and the Ramban says. So what does Saadia Gaon say? He says, through conversations with God, Moshe learned every single Jewish law that will ever be known. But somehow this knowledge was lost, and the Mishnah, that's what this is, the Mishnah is the rabbi's project of recovering them. First of all, let me just give a definition of Mishnah so you understand it. Mishnah is this oral law, this law right here that was whispered, written down. And we'll kind of ask the question why it was written down. What are the advantages and disadvantages of writing it down? But that's what this is. Mishnah equals the oral law written down. Okay. So for question number 6, what is the definition of Mishnah? Great. So again, so Saadia Gaon and the Ramban both give 2 reasons why. So do me a favor and read over those reasons and summarize Saadia's question number 7 and summarize the Rambam question number 8. And question number 9, tell me which one that you agree with more. Great. Okay. Now I want to ask a question of, if this is called, if Mishnah were actually renaming and saying that's not just Mishnah, it's not just oral law written down, it is actually Torah too, on the same status level as the written Torah. Who would benefit most from making this claim? That's question number 10. And who would be hurt most by making the claim that Mishnah is Torah? That second question is pretty hard. People who would benefit most are people who are written within this document, the people who are the holders of this document, the knowers of this document would benefit from that being of high status, because all of a sudden I'm just not the owner or the knower of material that I made up. It's material that God spoke as well, right? And who would be the herders of this? And I'm going to give us a little example right here by asking the following question. Here we have the Student Parent Handbook by Jill Quigley. Let's suppose Jill Quigley goes off to Hawaii to vacation, and all of a sudden the president of the ASB tells us, actually, there are a lot of rules that aren't talked about in this handbook, but don't worry, I met with Miss Quigley and she transmitted everything to me that you need to know. Whose status goes up by by there being all of these extra laws? That's question number 12. Whose power and status goes down? Right? Obviously, Ben's goes up. Mrs. Quigley's in some way goes down. There's someone else who is of equal, who has laws that are equally as important, right? And so then the question is, what about this? And I just asked this question: who's the most threatened by the claim that this is Torah too? And let's ask that question. Oh, look at that. Who's going to be most to blame? Well, in the Torah itself, who are the people that have the most power? Look at the different stories for a second and see who it is that seems to be the people with a lot of status, a lot of power, people who the Torah says, these are your important people. Who are they? Actually, and if you look at Vayikra, we see them here. These are the workers of God's house, because they are, in a sense, and if we look at this is a breakdown of all of the different Torah portions. And look at all the Torah portions that have to do with these people, the priests or the Kohanim. Kohanim are the priests. Kohanim are talked about a lot in the Torah. Over a third of the Torah is about them. So all of a sudden, if you're telling me, well, I have something else that's as important as the Torah, all of a sudden the Kohanim are getting nervous. Look at that. So here's a Kohen right here saying, how stoked am I? So much of this is all about me. But then, and by the way, these guys have a name. The people who kind of felt like, I want only the Torah to be important. I don't think there's another kind of law out there that's as equally as important. These were called the Sadducees. And of course, they fought with another group called of the rabbis, who we know of as the Pharisees. Those are two good words to know: Sadducees and Pharisees. Um, and look at what the rabbi says here. You may have a lot of power and influence according to this Torah, but here are two things that are important for you to know. What might those two things be? This is question number 14. Okay, what are those two things? Well, and by the way, to help us out, the time period is 70 CE. And of course, what happens in 70 CE? The Romans, probably a few years earlier, in 63 CE, they wage war against Israel, and they come into Jerusalem in 70 CE, and they destroy the temple. They destroy the very place where this guy is working. And what does he do there? He sacrifices animals for God. That's how prayer happens. Prayer is taking my animal to the temple, to the Beit HaMikdash, and the Kohen, this guy right here, who's in charge of maintaining, of keeping it clean, of running the different events that happen inside of the temple. He's doing his work, he's killing the animal, and that's your way of worshiping God. So, what is this person saying? You may have a lot of power and influence according to this Torah, meaning this Torah, but what? Here are answers. But one, there's another Torah called the Oral Torah, Torah Shabbat Peh, and that's as important as this Torah. And number two, the very structure of what gave you power, God's house, is no longer around. It's been destroyed. So actually, you don't really have that much power anymore. Those are the Pharisees. Now, interestingly enough, much later in history, 700 CE, so 630 years later, check this out. The rabbis are the rabbinic Judaism that kind of came about from the Pharisees are saying, how stoked am I? This oral Torah that's become so important is all about me, right? And then this group right here is saying, I don't agree. I don't agree. This is not. And so this person in 1700 says, not so fast. There's only one Torah, and it's the written one. Me and my Karaite friends reject Torah Sheb'al Peh. So these are the now no longer the Sadducees, but they have a link to them because they're thinking the exact same thing. I only agree with the Torah and no comment whatsoever. And this is a guy named Anan ben David and the Karaites. And by the way, I ended the day with a really interesting story about the what happened during the Shoah, during the Holocaust. That these Karaites actually are still around today. You can meet a Karaite. We could have an interview with a Karaite. But it just so happened Karaites were around when the Nazis started to kill and murder all of the Jews of Eastern Europe. And all of a sudden, they go into a community and they find the Jews, they kill them, and they find this group called the Karaites. And they're like, well, what do I do with this group? Are these people Jewish? Are they not? So the Nazis basically they take three rabbis and they ask them, like, are these Jews? And these three Jews say, no, they're not Jewish. They do things different than us. They practice laws different than us. They're actually not Jewish. And in that way, actually, the Karaites are saved to this day. And the question is, were they lying or were they actually truthful? Like, is Judaism without the rabbinic, without the oral law, without the Torah Shebaal Peh, really Judaism?